King of all? Is he king above all? Is he truly the Lord? Is he truly our Savior? Is he the Messiah who's come to rule and to reign in this kingdom and in our hearts? If that is the case, our question should be, then what does he say about how we ought to respond? And he, God, shares that with us through his word, and specifically here in Hebrews. But I would say this, along the long list of right responses, what we just did is one of those, is declaring the goodness of God in the worship of God together with the family of God. And as the response, we confidently trust, we confidently believe, and we follow as we stand on the past faithfulness of God. But today we see that faithful endurance is the next right response. I first respond in faith, then I respond with endurance. So with that in mind, let's stand and let's just read the first two verses of Hebrews chapter 12. Very familiar passage as last week was. I think we probably all heard this at some point in some context or another. And it says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by so after sharing this description of faith and the many examples of how faith is lived out, the author seems to look at them and us, and he says, all right, look at me. Your turn. He shares what faith is, what faith looks like lived out, and then he turns to that audience and he says, now it's your turn. To do what? To by faith believe and with endurance to run the race. We cannot escape the situation that they were in. We heard it last week, and I believe in verse 32 of chapter 11, maybe it was chapter 10. We heard it the last couple of weeks about everything that they were experiencing. We know that this people, the people that first got this letter, and it was all typed up, right, for them in a nice published book. No, it arrived in a scroll, and so they would undo the scroll, and then they were all gathering around, and they would read this letter from this author that maybe they knew, but we're not sure of because he doesn't give himself credit anywhere in here, and they sit around this letter. What shape are they in? They're tired, they're worn out, they're curious, they're concerned. It's uncertain how life will go for them, and they're caught in between what to do. Should I go back to the old covenant? There seems to be safety there. There's definitely that way. Or should we continue going with this person, Jesus Christ, whom we've heard? And so the letter steps into that, and it says, let me tell you why you need to follow Jesus. So the point is this, though. In the midst of them being caught in between a rock and a hard place, trying to figure out which way they would go, in the midst of all this truth and all the horrible situations that are surrounding them, and let me just tell you this, it's going to get so much worse for these people. If you know history, you know that the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. This letter was written around 64 and 67 A.D. So they're 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years before the temple that represented what? The earthly temple will be destroyed. And so they're living in the birth pains of that great persecution era. And so to that, he doesn't say, y'all just give up, it's going to get bad, y'all just need to run for the hills. What does he tell them? Looks like. So if you notice that first word in chapter 12 is what? You can say it on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Therefore, all right? So it's always good when you see a therefore to ask what the therefore is there for. The therefores are there for a very good reason today because they seem to guide our responses to how do we respond. So they give us the answers, and they really structure or separate the chapter for us. And we see the first therefore right out of the gate. Therefore, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses or examples, let us do some things. And what does he say to do? Well, that's our first point and our first right response to how we faithfully endure. You lay aside Jesus, and kind of a deal. And he just ran, and he ran, and one day I decided I was going to stop running, and then he stops running. But in my mind, I'm thinking, as far as running, no matter what, in every situation that he faced, he didn't stop to shave, he didn't stop to shower, he didn't stop to do anything. He just ran and ran and ran and ran and ran, and that's the image for us. Just run. How do we run? You lay aside the weight. You look to Jesus and you run. It tells us this, lay aside every weight, the middle of verse 1, that so closely clings to you. and run with endurance the race that's set before you. That's not going to seem to be that case at the end of 12 or the middle of 12, but the whole chapter is this image of a race, and the therefores show us how we are to run the race, all right? So the image is a race, and there's so many obvious weights when you think about setting aside the weights. There's so many obvious weights and sin that we allow to cling so closely to us. There's some obvious things that we all must avoid, but the intent here is to make it personal. Now, we need to do this rightly, because to them, what was the weight to them? He tells them, let aside every weight and sin which clings so closely to you. What was their weight? So to look to Jesus. So that informs what weights are you talking about? The weights that cast your eyes off of Jesus. Get rid of that weight that prevent you from looking to Jesus. Because when you get rid of that weight, then you can look to Jesus. And when you're looking to Jesus, then you can run. You can't run if your eyes are not on the prize, not on Christ himself. So what's keeping you from looking to, and here's the cool part, and seeing him clearly? You may be trying to look at him and to him, but the things are just clouding your view. Those are the weights in your life, because you could easily go to a lot more tangible weights that we have in our life, and those are like on the secondary closely. And for them, it was the fact that life was not going too well for them. It was the suffering that they were causing. You can't only see Jesus, but Jesus is what you see above everything else. Does that make sense? We've got to understand that. Jesus, and looking to Jesus means to look away from everything else. That's not to say that you won't see anything else, but that you see Jesus above everything else, which is a stark difference. In other words, that when you enter into a marriage, when you become a parent, when you go to your career, or when you do anything else in life, there's a lot of things that hold great weight in your life. I love being a husband about life and where I messed up and how bad of a person I am. That comes in, the grief, the weight comes in when I take my eyes off of Jesus. In other words, when he's not above all else, it becomes the focus, and very soon my life becomes derailed. Now, derailed can mean a lot of things. I could be totally off course. I could be in danger of going off a cliff, or I could be off the cliff and sitting there miserable. Either way, when the weight of my life becomes the focus. And so you can go to the secondary and you say, when your marriage becomes your focus, when your kids become your focus, when your career becomes your focus, when achieving goals become your focus, when all of these things, when they become the focus, just prepare yourself, because you're going to experience failure. And when it is the focus, it determines your life. And then all of a sudden, derailment happens. Grief comes in, sorrow comes in, and then you're confused, covered and smothered. That's the state we find ourselves in. But the hope here is that we lay aside those weights. We put those weights in their proper place. And then we look to Jesus and allow him to be the priority of our lives, which is what Paul would say, no matter whether you eat or drink, do it all for the glory of God. Make him the primary focus, the focal point of your life. But notice what he says in verse 3. He says, consider Jesus, who intention in the bag. I don't know. We need to dig into that, so don't take me at my word and quote me at the lunch table or anything else. Every image that we see here is when you run in your strength, it's going to look pretty silly. And it's going to look pretty seriously bad as you come to this. But the promise here is to consider Jesus, who endured before us and for us. Verse 3 is what he said. He endured from sinners hostility against himself. And he did so of many reasons and for many reasons, so that you would not grow weary, so that you would not be faint-hearted, so you wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. That's why he ran, so you wouldn't be defeated. Weary and faint-hearted literally means collapsing from exhaustion. The one he loves. And he chastises every son whom he receives. It's sure. You've got to let this have its work. Do you think that this issue is in your life by chance? Do you think the sickness, do you think the cancer, do you think the death, do you think lightly? Job